talk a lot on this channel about how to learn, different techniques for studying, and ways you can maximize your time. I do this because it's the methods that ultimately made the difference for me, and that's what allowed me to learn the languages that I have learned. So for the most part, we've been talking about how to learn and how to get from point A to point B in the best way possible in this language learning process. What we haven't talked about so much is what happens once you get to point B, meaning once you kind of achieve your goal, what do you do from there? And of course, everyone will have a different idea about what point B is for them personally in the language learning process. And of course, you're never really finished with a language because there's always stuff you can learn. But let's just say that you do get to a point where you're feeling pretty good, you're feeling comfortable, and you can now do those things that you wanted to do in that language. What happens now? And this is something we don't necessarily consider while we're studying, but it's something we do have to come to terms with when we hopefully reach this point. Meaning, once we get to a decent level in a language, do we now have to maintain that? Are we now obligated to keep working on this language indefinitely in order to maintain the level that we worked so hard to achieve in the first place? And if we stop using the language, are we going to forget it? And if so, how fast does that happen? So in this video, I want to talk a little bit about maintaining languages and why you should consider perhaps not doing so at all. So there's a very cool phenomenon that happens in language learning where if you get to a certain skill level, you pass a certain threshold, it becomes much harder to forget that language. And I don't know why this works, but I have seen it over and over and over in my experience. So if you are studying, obviously the more time that you put into a language, the better it's going to stick. But there is a definite point where that retention curve skyrockets up, and that point tends to be in the intermediate levels of language skill, meaning a B1 or ideally B2 or higher on the European scale, or N3, N2. If you can get it to that intermediate level, you're going to have a much harder time forgetting it. And so one way that you can avoid having to work to maintain a language is by ensuring that you get to that point in that language. So I tend not to maintain my languages just for that reason, because I can get away with not doing it as long as I study them enough to reach that threshold. The other thing is that I really prefer to only focus on studying one language at a time. So I don't want to worry about juggling French and Italian and Spanish, whatever, while I'm trying to learn Japanese. I need the focus and the time to put into that one language. So if there are other languages that I want to continue to use, say French or Italian, I want to make sure that those languages are at a decent level so that I'm not going to have to work super hard to get those languages back when I need them. The other cool thing about taking a language to that point is that if you ever do need to get it back, you can do so very quickly. So with the languages that I have taken to that point, my French and Italian, I can easily take 6 months or a year off of studying those languages and not have too many issues coming back to them. On the other hand, my Norwegian or the bits and pieces of Spanish, Turkish, German, things I've learned traveling, if I'm not using those very regularly, my skill level deteriorates very quickly in those languages. So it's definitely a good idea and sort of like a bit of insurance on your investment of time in a language to get it to that nice, solid, intermediate level before you move on to doing something else. So I have a particular little procedure that I go through anytime that I need to revive an old language. And so I recently had a chance to do this with my Italian because I took a trip to Italy and my Italian was getting a little bit rusty. I haven't studied it in almost a year, and even though I've had some chances to speak it, I have Italian friends and stuff, so I can use it from time to time. I was getting a little bit rusty and I was getting slow and forgetting some of the words that I wasn't using on a regular basis. But I had this trip coming up to Italy, and so I wanted to be back in shape with my Italian. And so I filmed myself doing just that. So the basic process for getting the language back is that around 2 weeks before the trip, I start getting back into my flashcards a little bit. Obviously, during this time, I was primarily focused on learning Japanese, but I could afford to put in 5 to 10 minutes of Italian flashcards a day. So that just helps kind of get things back into the foreground of my mind in Italian, and also I just made sure to try and watch things in Italian, maybe a movie or a YouTube video. And that also helps sort of remind you of the things that you learned before. So please enjoy this Italian revival adventure, my Italian mini mission, and I hope that you find some of these techniques and thoughts useful in your own language learning.
Posso bestemmiare?
Sì, vai.
No.
Ok. Ciao ragazzi, questo è Pierluigi.
Piacere.
Lui è un vero italiano, io sono finto. Lui fa la pizza. E quindi facciamo questo video perché andiamo in Italia fra un mese. Devo riimparare l'italiano.
Ma lo sai già?
Lo so, però ho dimenticato un po'. Quindi devo risuscitare il mio italiano.
Risuscitare.
Cosa dici, Pier?
Adesso mangiamo la pizza e beviamo una birra.
No, bravo. Ok, basta ragazzi. Alla prossima.
Ciao.
Ciao. Allora, oggi ho cominciato a fare le cose italiane, cioè imparare l'italiano di nuovo. Posso ricordare la maggior parte delle parole che conoscevo, però ho dimenticato un sacco delle cose che non uso frequentemente. Mi ricordo tutte le cose quotidiano, non lo so, quotidien en français. Comunque mi ricordo le cose più importanti. Questo è giorno 1. Oggi per l'italiano ho studiato solo un po', perché ho dovuto studiare tanto il giapponese, quindi solo ho fatto 20 minuti, qualcosa così, in italiano. Per i flashcard ho fatto, infatti sulla la mia roba italiano, nella mia, come dire, mazzo di flashcard, ho le cose, ho le parole più frequenti nel un altro mazzo. Mamma mia. Quindi ho studiato le parole, le 1000 parole più usate in italiano. Questo è giorno 2. Ciao, allora oggi è sabato, quindi questo vuol dire che studio l'italiano da 6 giorni. L'italiano comincia a essere un po' più facile a ricordare, a parlare. Ogni giorno provo a guardare qualcosa in italiano, per esempio The Show, il mio canale italiano preferito su YouTube, e quindi guardo almeno uno di questi video. A volte guardo un film la sera. A parte questo, provo a parlare. Giorno numero 6, tutto va bene. Devo fare il tour vlog.
Ah sì?
Sì, dai.
Bravo! Siamo all'inizio.
All'inizio andiamo a Newark.
Jump around. Jump around.
Oggi siamo in Svezia e domani andiamo in Italia. Quindi non vedo l'ora di andarci e sono pronto a parlare italiano. Sono arrivato in Italia qualche giorno fa e stavo talmente occupato con i gelati, le pizze, che non sono riuscito a fare un video. Quindi adesso devo parlare. Adesso che sono in Italia sono costretto a parlare in italiano tutto il tempo e quindi la lingua comincia a essere molto più facile. E quindi è perfetto perché non ho dovuto studiare tanto per arrivare a questo livello.
Andiamo a servo la domani.
Bravi!
Grazie.
Bravi! Ciao! Allora, oggi sono qui a Trieste, è molto bella questa città, è vicino Slovenia e qui c'è la baia di Trieste. Una volta sono andato in barca a vela di là, molto bello. Scusate, ci sono lavori. Solo volevo dire che oggi è l'ultima giornata qui in Italia per il momento, perché domani purtroppo partiamo. Vado in Libano per suonare un concerto per la prima volta. E quindi è la fine del mio viaggio in Italia per il momento. E sono contento perché ho avuto l'opportunità di parlare un sacco di italiano e sono contento perché non ho dovuto lavorare troppo per ricordare tutto quello che ho saputo. Quindi sono riuscito a parlare più o meno come parlavo l'anno scorso quando ero in Italia e sono molto contento perché è una lingua che non ho mantenuto e quindi è stato un po' difficile all'inizio, cioè qualche settimana fa, però siccome sono riuscito a avere un livello abbastanza alto l'anno scorso, è stato abbastanza facile ottenere questo livello di nuovo senza troppo lavoro, quindi sono molto contento e sì, è tutto per questo video, quindi grazie a voi e ci vediamo presto. Ciao!
And so that's it. I hope you enjoyed my Italian mini mission. I want to leave you with one alternative approach that you can take to this thing that I've been describing this whole video. And that is something I've been trying this year, and that is that I have been maintaining my French all of this year while I've been learning Japanese. And I've been doing that in a very minimal way that's been working quite nicely. So what I do is I allow myself to study just 5 new flashcards a day in French, and I also do the other reviews that are due in French that day. And so normally, because I'm keeping my workload to such a minimum, I'm able to finish this in 3 to 4 minutes a day. And so it's just something that's very easy to get up and do that first thing in the morning and be done with it. And that sort of keeps my French active along with speaking it on a fairly regular basis. And that has been working for me as one alternative to this approach if you do want to try maintaining a language while learning another. This is a very minimal way that can work. But in general, I do use the approach that I described in this video where I just don't maintain my languages, and as long as you get it to a good enough level, you can get away with that. And so for me, that has been super helpful, and I hope it is for you too. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. Ciao!